Good afternoon. I'm Coral Gartner and I'm the Director of the Tobacco Endgame Centre of Research Excellence, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting for this online event. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on Jagera and Turrbal country, and I pay my respects to their ancestors and descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connection to country and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. Today, I'm very pleased to be introducing Associate Professor Ryan Courtney as our speaker. Ryan is a Research Fellow with the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre at the University of New South Wales, and he holds a National Heart Foundation Future Leader Fellowship. Ryan will be presenting today about how text messaging support can be used to support smoking cessation for a wide range of population groups and may be particularly helpful for people living on low incomes. If you have any questions for Ryan during the talk, just please type these into the Q&A box, and we'll come to these at the end of the talk, and we'll try to allow plenty of time for discussion at the end. So now I'd like to hand over to Ryan. Thanks very much.
All right. Well, thanks so much for that kind introduction, Coral. And also I'd like to acknowledge our First Nations people. I'm currently on Gadigal land and pass my respects to past, current and emerging. Yeah, today I'll be talking about text messaging in particular for smoking cessation, which I think everyone will probably agree that it's a nice change from the headlines at the moment with a lot of vaping and polarized views, but hopefully we can come to some agreement on where text messaging is placed and its purpose and how it can be utilized to support quit smoking. So as Coral said, I'm based at the University of New South Wales and I'm the head of the tobacco research group here. And today I'll walk through some of the evidence and approaches for text messaging, some of the previous studies, and then spotlight a trial that we're currently running here that was funded by NHMRC, which was a project grant. So in Australia, we know there's approximately 2.3 million people that smoke daily. It's approximately 11% of the population aged over 14. But we do know also that there's a social gradient in use in terms of uptake, but also there's also disparate difference in difficulties in quitting as well. But we know that currently for those living in low socioeconomic areas, the rates of smoking are a lot higher than their more privileged counterparts. So the use of quit smoking aids, particularly for, the quit line in itself has been quite low, despite it always being the backbone and a very effective smoking cessation aid. So as you can see there for the two phone-based response options in the NDSHS, that use of an app and quit line as well is lucky to get above 10%. A key issue with current approaches in terms of behavioural approaches, the same applies for pharmacotherapy as well. So it's not just isolating the issue to one side of the treatment endeavour. But there's even in the US, where the Centre for Disease Control has constantly pushed for a 6% uptake in quit lines, only about 2% of US smokers currently or have ever used them. And this replicates some data that we looked at in, I think it was Hilda some years ago, but it looked like across multiple waves that only 3.2% of smokers had used the quit line services. And even in some of our, amongst treatment seeking population, in some of our randomized control trials, we found that only 31% had actually accessed the quit line prior to enrolment. So all this work, well, for me anyway, was sparked by an examination of the midpoint report of the National Tobacco Strategy. It was some years ago now when this was written in 2016, but it seemed to echo similar trends really, where we weren't on track to reach the COAG benchmarks, which unfortunately happened again not too long ago. But they did emphasise that there's a high priority for Commonwealth, state and territory governments to jointly invest in the merits of alternate models of quitline service delivery and coordination, and to look at more targeted strategies to reach the most disadvantaged. And this sort of overlaps too with a more global strategy by the WHO, the tobacco-free initiative that's looked at mHealth. In particular, they've got a mHealth handbook that you can look at as well for text messaging. It's pretty handy, but they really pushed over a considerable amount of time the need for high reach, cost effective, scalable and sustainable tobacco control interventions. So text messaging falls very nicely into that space. So there's a number of technological approaches to smoking cessation. Some common ones you might be aware of are the I Can Quit website, for instance, in New South Wales. There's other state-based ones as well, text programs, as well as the My Quit Buddy, and a plethora of apps that you can download from the App Store and other places. So many years ago now, 2017, when this was published, we did some work on trying to look at what alternative approaches to smoking cessation would look like. So we recruited some smokers and ex-smokers out of a trial that were running at the time that had a government pension allowance, and we wanted to get an understanding from them. We need to consider that they are a treatment-seeking population, of course, as they were in a previous clinical trial, but what they thought about other approaches to quitting. And for example, related to tech support, they said, I think it's probably a little bit better than a phone call because it's a little bit more personal. Everyone uses their phones these days. So yeah, it's a personal conversation. So particularly in low income groups, there's a lot of stigma around treatment seeking. So yeah, for text messaging, it was seen as a safe and quiet space without any sort of counsellor looking over their shoulder or repeated phone calls, which they liked. And then another person said, if I was getting a text message when I was feeling vulnerable, it could probably turn me away from smoking. And also there's a text there about avoiding the stigma or shame associated with smoking. I mean, you don't have to tell anyone who you're texting or whatever. So we also got to thinking about, well, if a technological approach like text messaging had potential, then what would this user group need in terms of tailoring and interactive support, and what did they think of the ideas of a program being able to do such a thing? And in this aspect, they said, I think it's important to emphasize that it would be interactive texting as opposed to just receiving a message, so unidirectional versus bidirectional. And the health benefits I'd like just to come up after a specific time and money saved, and you've also saved this much, I would be happy with that. So that's there about some sort of tailoring you could do around cost of smoking over time and reduce spending if managing to reduce and quit as well in a program. So some of the key features of text messaging for smoking cessation is that it's got really high reach. So we know that there's really high mobile phone coverage globally, over 90%. And probably also the affordability, in the sense that a lot of low middle income countries unfortunately don't have the resources to house quitline support or other face-to-face support, for instance, that might be present in the UK with the stop smoking services. So it has a low setup cost and minimal ongoing staffing once the program's developed, and implementation can also occur quite seamlessly, as it's easily automated and delivered on a large scale. And then, as I've indicated previously, particularly among priority population groups, it seems to be a platform that has a high satisfaction, that they seem to like the text message idea as opposed to the traditional approaches of face-to-face or telephone counselling. So some of the previous studies, so in a nutshell, I guess to start off with, the Cochrane review now is 2019. It's a bit old, but it will be updated soon, no doubt. But at that time, there was moderate certainty evidence that text messaging interventions are more effective than minimal smoking cessation care, and it increased quit rates estimated to be 50 to 60%. So what is text messaging being compared to? So some of the common comparators include self-help booklets or information guides, internet or website interventions, usual care advice from a health professional, lower frequency text message quit support programs, or generic study-related text messages. So who has been researched? So typically it's been smokers wanting to quit. So a lot of the time young people between 18 to 30 years, and also pregnant women. We also did a systematic review a while ago now, but it also showed that amongst disadvantaged groups and priority populations, that there is actually a really low level of information when it comes to clinical or trial evidence of text messaging in particular, but we also looked at other technological based approaches. So this was in 2005, in terms of the evolution of text messaging, from what we knew at this point, was this really led the road. It was quite a basic program. it was unidirectional. It didn't have bidirectional features where text would come back, and it was quite a short program and didn't have any tailoring, and it showed quite positive results, albeit only 6 weeks post-intervention. And this actual text program then led to the development of, so that's called the STOMP, this trial, and then it led into the development of the text to stop, which to my understanding is one of the largest. There may be others in China that are larger in the Cochrane review, but this is a quite a big study with 5,800 randomized and had a decent rate of quitting follow-up at a desirable longer time frame using continuous abstinence. It was also biochemically confirmed, so it was quite a strong study design, and they found that the quit rates at 6 months were virtually double in the text group compared to control. In America, there's been by Abrams, there's been a study there that's been done that was also quite handy, albeit some of the measurement points were at 7 days at 1 month, and the effect wasn't quite found at a later time point. But this program, to my knowledge, led to upscaling in the US, and similar, the base platform of the STOMP program actually led to universal availability in New Zealand and America and a few other countries. But to my knowledge, still at the moment, there's only a text-based program available in Victoria at the moment in Australia. And some of the shortfalls of these studies has been probably the efforts to tailoring and personalisation, which I'll get to in a sec when we walk through the current trial that we've got here at UNSW NDART that we're undertaking. Also, there's been some work in the vaping space that was recently published indicating that text messaging was effective, albeit it was, from my reading, was 7-day point prevalence, but the quit rates were favourable to the intervention arm compared to control, 24.1 and 18.6%. So some of you on the call may be thinking about, well, if I was going to develop a text program, how would I do it? So there's a really nice handbook by Abrams, one of the authors of the lead paper that I was talking to before in American Journal of Preventive Medicine, and Robin Whitaker, who's been on a lot of the other trials too, is another author there amongst other really expert colleagues. But this paper, published in 2015, outlines the steps for designing a text program. So first of all, you need to isolate the behaviour change goal and the behavioural techniques, and then start to design the messaging framework. So the timing, frequency, interactive aspects and tailoring, and then write the text message content as part of it. So generally that would be an expert advisory group that would do that. And yeah, inputs from users would be also desirable, but it then goes into a pre-testing and revising phase of the program. It's important and should involve multiple rounds of feedback and revision. So focus groups that, they can be different compositions in terms of individual or group-based and how they may be conducted. But there's lots of iterations there around aspects of the content and frequency that need to be ironed out. And then you've got the pilot phase that needs to happen as well. So that was, a very nutshell overview of how to develop a text program. It's a lot more comprehensive, so those that wish to can see the reference there and read more about it. But also, as I said earlier, there's a Be Healthy, Be Mobile handbook too, developed by the WHO, that's very useful as well, that outlines similar details on how to develop such a program. So what's next in the space? Fortunate enough, the group here at NDARC and the Tobacco Research Group to get some funding from NHMRC actually to look at tailored text messaging versus standard quit line services for smoking cessation among a low socioeconomic status. So to some surprise for some in the audience, they might be wondering, why this will be the first trial actually that did compare to quitline services, which we know has been an effective support services and at the backbone of cessation support in many middle to high income countries for a long time. But some of the limitations of previous literature has that it's been typically only compared to control or minimal ethical care. And I think the downsides of some of the previous studies too is often they've been amongst the general population and some targeted groups, albeit not across a broad lower socioeconomic status group. And in this trial, we've recruiting people that have a government pension allowance as a proxy for low income. So the trial, it's a non-inferiority RCT. There's two groups, 1,246 participants, and the inclusion criteria includes aged 18 and over, in receipt of a government pension allowance, current daily smoker, ability to speak English and own a mobile phone, and participants will be followed up over a period of 12 months. And the primary outcome is 6 months continuous CO verified smoking abstinence at 12 months. So the study flow diagram looks something like this. So screening and consenting is contacted by staff via Microsoft Teams here at the remote trial centre. So screening consent actually is done via a survey that the participant can fill out and link sent, and it comes back. Baseline interviews completed by a telephone interview. And then at the end of that, they're randomized to either the tailored text program or the quitline support. There's a check-in call that happens between day 15 and day 28 after randomization, a 3-month adherence evaluation survey that looks at acceptability also of both treatments. And then at 12-month follow-up, we have assessment of the primary outcome, which is verified by a carbon monoxide breath test. So some of you may wonder, how did we develop this tailored text message program? It's quite in depth, and there's probably way more detail than I'd have the time to go through today. But first of all, you start off with an expert advisory group that develops the text, and we're fortunate enough actually to have a base platform of text available from not only the Be Healthy, Be Mobile handbook that has some text, but also the STOMP program in New Zealand. We were able to source some text there that had already been used and validated in the field. But we realised that we wanted to do tailoring, so and it was a much wider and longer program, so we needed more text because this text program goes for up to 12 months. So we isolated the BCT. So if you look at the BCT framework, unfortunately, despite a lot of them being there, some of them just can't be applied in a text program because sometimes they require face-to-face monitoring, for instance. The tailoring, we had to think about what aspects we think should be tailored to based on what we know about facilitators and barriers and other modifiable factors that are related to quitting. And then we had to start to develop a text message bank. So we had consumer feedback sessions across multiple sessions. So we had 10 current or ex-smokers, and they provided key feedback in the initial stages to reduce the frequency and number of texts per day, because originally we thought, oh yeah, 5 texts per day would be good, but that was actually based on the most solid evidence we had in the UK at the time from the Text to Stop study, but they were saying, no, we want lesser texts initially. So we refined the program. And then we did another session as well with them to look through the actual tailoring we had, and then also input on the actual text message program and how it would work, and which keywords they would like and what they generally thought about the tailoring, personalization, and how the package would come together. So we got to a point after all that qualitative work where we had a 12-month program with over 300 texts. The texts ranged in frequency from 3 a day to 2 a week at the end. And we had 4 personalization tokens, for example, participant's name, 11 tailoring tokens. So for instance, quit approach, reasons for quitting, use of quit smoking products, and over 100 options of personalized tailored messages within the program. So how did the tailoring work? So here's an example. For instance, someone may have reported during their baseline interview that they had concern for their health. So they would be then provided a tailored text that would look like this. It doesn't matter how old you are or how long you've been smoking. By quitting, you're giving yourself a healthier future. You can do this. And then if someone reported as a key trigger social events, for instance, they would get a text like this. You don't have to stop going to social events to quit smoking. Just be ready to fight the triggers, set a quit plan, and stick to it. And additional features we also have in the program, keyword functionality. So participants can text in keywords such as crave, urge, lapse for extra support. I think there's another 3 off the top of my head that I can't remember, but there is a virtual quit buddy as well. It's named Lou, that's used in the program. And supporting links, GIFs, and emojis are also used in some of the texts as well. So recruitment has commenced. We started early in November 2022. We're only 6 months into recruitment and have another 18 months to go to complete final data capture, and that'll occur in the last quarter of 2024. So that's pretty much a wrap up. I know it's quite a quick and brief snapshot, but that's text messaging in smoking cessation, a current trial we're doing here at NDUC. So thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks so much for that, Ryan. Really interesting. So if anyone has questions, please, pop them in the Q&A and I'll get to them. So I guess I'll just ask some questions firstly. So now the program that you've developed, it's got some set messages that are kind of tailored, like popping in the participant's name and things like that, and obviously responding to particular issues, I guess, that people have raised, like if they type in crave and so on. Is there any thoughts about making it more like interactive, like going more the AI chatbot route, or
good comment. Yeah, I think the answer is yes, Coral, and that's where the world will probably go. And I did think to myself, like doing this tailoring program, I thought, oh no, someone's beat us to the punch. We've got this new AI bot, but I think I'm not sure whether the technology's there yet. I think a lot of the AI bot stuff, I think it's hard to disentangle and control like the actual evidence base of what is the best advice and tips to provide, I think. But I don't know whether it'll ever replace the insight that a human would have, but I think it's definitely going to be a way of the future. I don't think it's necessarily going to replace a text. Well, the text program could become more body. I mean, there is already, I think Cancer Institute does have a chat bot, I think they call it in New South Wales. So it's happening, and there's a few different ones on Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp that I've seen. So the world will continue to change, I'd say, which is good.
Yeah. And what about, so, a lot of the text messaging programs are automated where, there's a whole lot of texts that are loaded up into the system that they kind of like feed out to the participants or the clients. Are there any programs where they actually have a human sitting there texting?
No, not that I'm aware of. It would be quite resource intensive, I'd say, to have a human there. And we do, I think a lot of the text programs try to say, like, they do have a reply function where if someone does text in a random text that it says, this is a unidirectional, or there, it's not, so a person actually there to respond straight away. Albeit there are some texts sometimes that do need replying, but there is a lot of, the whole point of the text program though is to try to be as resource less intensive as possible. So you probably do lose that edge, I guess, if you start to respond to too many of the texts outside of the keyword functionality. But
I was just thinking, because it still would address some of those issues around stigma and so on, and privacy. If someone wanted to have that quick line support, they didn't want to actually talk verbally. And what about combining quick line counselling with text messaging? I'm sure that there are programs that are already doing that, where obviously I guess you can sign up to both.
You can join them all together. So that's definitely a possibility. I don't think text messaging would never supplement, I think, the aspects of human being and interaction. I think it's really important to think of our futures, and I don't think the bots are going to change the world when no one will have a job, so to speak. But I think the reality is that it is another option that can be used. It can be used alongside other existing treatments, or it can be used in isolation. But I think one of the things we really struggle with in the field is that we only have an isolated and few available pharmacotherapy treatments, and not many that people are really happy to engage with when it comes to behavioural. So any extra treatment we can have with high scale is probably going to be a win. But so that's just my thoughts. But Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the next question is actually from Chanel, is about dose. So you mentioned that in that, I think it was the Abrams guidelines or paper, that they were using 5 text messages a day,
Yeah.
but the consumers didn't really want that much texting at them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then also, what's the most effective? So is
Yeah.
there
I
much
think great
evidence
question.
on it?
No, not really. I mean, to unpack that would be a I'd like to unpack that and do a trial. You could probably do it with the most design where you have the same text message program and just change the frequency. But I'm not sold on really the intensity that much. I think one of the benefits of text messaging, I think, if you think about the totality of a whole day and just the fact that you can leave it there and get to it when you want to, when you're in the right space. I think whether it's 5 or 3, it's a bit anecdotal, but I don't think it really matters. I think it's just matters that it gets. One of the best things about text messaging is once you've got your number, it's delivered. Yeah. Whereas current treatment approaches with a referral relies then on someone picking it up at the other end and then facilitating scheduling and calling for face-to-face or behavioural support. So yeah, a good question. I grappled with it for a long time, but I think I'm happy with just a bit less, given the known. And I'm sure they probably did do consumer group advise it, like in the development of the Abrams and other studies, but it seemed to me for some reason they stuck to 5 texts per day initially, and didn't change that. So yeah, but we've done that, so it's a point of difference, I guess.
And I guess most programs have a decreasing schedule, so they give you lots of messages up front regularly, like that, like the 5 a day or 3 a day or however many, and then over time, like you said, yours decreases down to 2 a week. Is that correct? I've got that right. So I guess has there been some consumer work done on, like, at what point people like the text to be less frequent, or has it just been a bit of?
No, I think it was a discussion. I think one of the length of this program, 12 months, is quite long. But we wanted to make sure we had an outcome that was at 12 months and 6 months, the longest period. So I think if I remember correctly, the longest program before that is about 6 months, and those programs had stopped. So I think also part of our program was also trying to put in a lot more relapse support and opportunities for another smoking cessation attempt if the first one or multiple had stopped, to pick themselves back up again. So it sort of is a bit of a perk, I guess, but there's a lot of unknowns here around, like, the exact dosing and how long a program should be. But unfortunately, when you live in the science of an RCT, it's often you confined by a budget and how many groups you can have. And it would have been nice probably to have quit line, high, low level support, and then low, high. But to get that funded, I'd probably need $7 million, and I don't know how long it would take to. I don't know, Coral, would that be close? Would you take 7 million to do it?
No, I don't know.
And you'd have to recruit, thousands more than. It could be done though, so it's a big undertaking. So you've got to, in the simplest way, try to answer a question, and then and you can either way, like once the program's developed and if it meets its hypotheses, that's great, and then you can do some future testing on what may work in the future. I guess it's not all lost though.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're going to have multiple different doses that you're testing, you would end up with quite a large sample size, if you're trying to test out frequency plus duration. I guess the other way would be if there was a way that you can actually measure how much they're engaging, like if there's a point where people just drop off, whether people can opt out of the texts or something like that, and then you can see at what point people no longer are engaging with the intervention.
So we do have a stop command that's used in all those programs actually, so you know the exact date and time stamp that they dropped out. So
Now I've got a question from Genevieve here about the fact that low-SES is quite a broad term, and there are lots of different groups and very diverse people that fall into that low income
Mhm.
category. Do you have ways that you are accommodating these differences, like, you know, pregnant people, people with mental illness or other substance use disorders? Is there anything like that that you've got in the program that you can personalize to those sorts of circumstances?
So the composition of the group that we've got, so we do have baseline characteristics to know mental health disorder or diagnoses and type for different whether or not they're pregnant, and then also other priority population groups, including Aboriginal, and I think also by benefit type too, we'll be able to break down. So there's a fair different ways that you could dissect it. Related to the actual tailoring of the program, so we do have like text based on, I think there's a keyword function we use for mood or something similar to that, and I think there is some tailoring based on mental health as well, but I'd have to go back to that. Sorry, there's 11 tailoring tokens. I should know, but if anyone in the chat and the team knows, please give me an update. It would be good. Yeah.
And I guess related to that, do you also have like non-English options, or is this all just in
At the
English?
moment, it's ability and English only. But from what I've found for other studies, I think some of the New Zealand studies have been upscaled into Argentina and a few, and maybe countries in the Pacific Islands as well. So it's not unusual, but I think we need to be careful around cultural references and norms when you can't just go into Google and then translate it. It's actually, there's a little bit of work I think that needs to go into that after you have found a program that might be effective. So yeah, but it is upscalable in that sense, I guess, or transferable.
And has there been much work on the cost effectiveness of implementing this at a national level?
I think there has been a few papers. There was actually a cost effectiveness paper for the text to stop, I know, and then there's another paper that they did after that that actually categorized all the BCTs. But surprisingly, they didn't use that many BCTs in it. I think less than 7 or 8% across all text. But to my knowledge, there are papers, but the exact inner details of that, Coral, I probably can't comment right now. But there are papers you could read. Yeah.
And do you have a cost effectiveness component to your
Yeah.
study?
Good question. Yeah. So we have PBS, MBS linkage that we do with the consent forms. And thankfully that's going to go online soon, which is great. So the days of waiting for the old post person to come with and then collating the numbers and then making sure they fill the form out of gone soon, which I can't wait for.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you said you still had 18 months left on your recruitment schedule. So I guess, you know, the results are still a fair way away, because then you've got a 12-month program for
Yeah.
the last person that's recruited to actually go through and so on. So when are you expecting results?
So they'll probably won't be until the back end of 2024 if we're lucky. I mean, we're up to 500 we've recruited so far since early November. So recruitment should be wrapped up by, I'd say, late July if we're lucky, maybe August. So yeah, that's an unknown one, but the recruitment seems to be going pretty well so far. So we're on track, I think. You know, as a PI, you're always, you know, you're either sleepless or you can sleep about one trial going really well, which is good. So we've been lucky here at NDART to have a few that went pretty well. So I'm hoping this one can keep going in a similar trajectory. But yes, Coral, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess all the data collection is being done remotely. And how are you doing the verification? Sorry, you may have already mentioned that, but
Yeah. So that's
are you doing that remotely as
CO.
well, or?
Yeah. So that's CO. Yeah. So either face to face or remote CO testing as well available. So that's another thing, and I think that's a good question. I mean, that's the hardest part with all our trials. I mean, credit to Caroline, actually free in the text to stop study. I think she collected saliva via mail, so I'd love to know what some of that saliva looked like when it come back. But yeah, she validated the outcome, which is the most important thing.
Okay. I've got a question here about how long do you consider someone to have quit that they need to be abstinent for? So I guess, for your study, you said you were using a 6 months continuous abstinence from 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Some of the other studies, though, I think, to be critical of them, I think they've probably either used, a shorter 7-day point prevalence at a shorter time point, which is often, like the accepted 6-month continuous abstinence is, the best that we've got in the field at the moment. So, so we try to stick with that and see how it goes.
Yeah. And so in terms of the tailoring, are people in your program able to decide the, method they want to quit by?
Oh, sorry, I should have said that. Yes, they can. Yep. So that's one of the tailoring is approach to quitting, like cut down or abrupt cessation. Yep. So they can do that. Yep. As well.
And what if they want to use e-cigarettes as a cessation aid?
Yeah. So we're very kind. We don't pick or choose one or the other, and we say, like, what do you want to, are you interested in using or currently using? And then based on that, we send them texts as to if they've said they're a current user or intending to use, we then send them texts to go, why not try such and such, depending on what they've said. Yeah. So varenicline, NRT, vaping, I think they're the main ones. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So someone who, say, wanted to do varenicline, you might, you recommend they go to their doctor then, I assume, or do you have to sort of like that?
No. We just say, like, why not try varenicline? Like, and then say, yes, this is how you would get it. Is like, talk to your doctor and you can get it on script. Yeah. Same for the patch. Yeah.
And so are you using, so doing the remote carbon monoxide testing, what device are you using?
Yes, that's the ICO. Yeah. That's a bed font device. Yeah. It's been around for about 5 or 6 years now, I think.
Yeah. And are you doing like record? So I know some trials, they, the person has to record themselves doing the test and so on. Are you doing to that level?
Yeah, you can do that recording. Yeah. I mean, it depends on resourcing, and obviously that's probably a better level to get to if you can. But as I said, I mean, similar criticism could be made anyway if someone's putting saliva in the mail. Unless you see them spit in it and you check their ID, you're never going to know. So you can really, great for Coral like you. I'd love you to review one of my papers because you've got a really ability to dissect, which is good. So yes, there's major limitations to all research, but we try to think of what they are and try to overcome them. So yeah, that would be the best approach, is to video them at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, let's see if I've got some more questions here. Oh, so that was Jenny was asking about the bed font device. So you're sending it to them?
Yes. Yeah.
And do they have to send it back?
No, I don't want it back. No, they can have it. No, they love it. They can have it, and if they've quit smoking, some of them keep using it. But so we just send it out in the mail and off it goes.
Yeah, so it's just part of the costs of doing the trial is the device.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we have run through all the questions here. So if there are no other questions, if anyone has any burning questions, please feel free to put it in the chat just in his last little while here, and I'll get to it. But I think we've covered everything that was in the chat. Questions?
All right. No worries. Well, thanks everyone. I'm pretty proud actually. 38 minutes to get out is really good, and I hope you can, catch up on whatever else you haven't got to in the last 22 minutes that's left. But pleasure to be able to present today, Coral, and thanks to you and your team in the CRE. I can't send my gratitude enough for the work you've done. Endgame space, it's fraught with some contention, but I'm glad that you're up there and you're getting amongst it, because there's lots of people that don't believe in a lot of those things, and that's okay. That's part of what we do as scientists, try to work through differences of opinion. But as long as your group continues to build the evidence we need to make better decisions, the world will be in a better place.
Oh, thanks so much, Ryan, and thanks for joining us today. And obviously these interventions like text messaging support and so on, we're always going to need that to help support those people, particularly if we're bringing in new interventions. that maybe hurry up the quit process for people, then they obviously need to be wrapped around with lots of quit support for people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. All
Okay.
good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.